Morning, everyone, and welcome to this roundtable on the effects of war on higher education in Ethiopia. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge the complex settler colonial histories and contested jurisdictional present of the indigenous lands on which we live and work. The University of Toronto Scarborough is located on the Rouge River Valley Tract and the Williams Treaties, and is also the ancestral land of many nations, including the Chippewas of Curve Lake, the Mississaugas of the Skagog Island, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and different Mohawk peoples. We also recognize that the Toronto, is in the dish with one spoon wampum, a covenant between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent indigenous nations and peoples, including newcomers, have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect, principles that we should all strive to uphold and implement in the current moment in all the spaces and communities we inhabit. To those who don't know me, my name is Natalie Rothman, and I'm the chair of the Department of Historical and Cultural Studies. This panel was organized in conjunction with a seminar in our department this term on conflict in the Horn of Africa, 13th to 21st centuries. And I'm very pleased to welcome not only our distinguished panelists, but also students in the course who are here in person, and everyone joining us remotely today from multiple continents and time zones. Before I turn the floor over to our moderator, Dr. Patrick Wight, who will introduce the panelists and explain the structure of this event, I'd like to take a moment to express our deep thanks to Heather Seto, Kamal Hassan, and Steve Biordi, who made this event possible and who worked very hard behind the scenes to make it a success. And finally, I wish to express my own gratitude for the opportunity to learn about a part of the world that is often sidelined by mainstream media in the global north. This is a conflict that has been subjected to massive misinformation, and interference campaigns at the highest levels, something that this panel was not spared either. As someone who grew up in Israel-Palestine, I know all too well how armed conflicts also involve struggles over public opinion in the powerful countries of the global north, and that erase often the specific histories and contexts in which these conflicts are rooted. I hope today we can go beyond these labels and short-sighted news cycles to learn something about the broader context in which the current conflict has emerged, and to hear firsthand from civilians and academics embroiled in the conflict about their experiences. In particular, I hope that the panelists give us plenty of food for thought on our own responsibilities as denizens of a university community that claims to be global and that certainly benefits from the current global order, to people directly impacted by what Amnesty International has described as war crimes. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our moderator, Dr. Patrick Wight, who will now introduce the panelists and explain how the event will unfold. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalie. So I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to this roundtable discussion on the effects of war on higher education in Ethiopia. We've gathered together an illustrious panel to discuss this very important topic. So the objective of this roundtable today is to inform the University of Toronto community, the Canadian government, and scholars and the broader public of the destruction of Ethiopia's contemporary system of higher education and its ancient cultural heritage as a consequence of the two-year-old war. This roundtable is an opportunity to discuss the role of Ethiopian universities outside of Tigray in perpetuating this situation. For example, Addis Ababa University has warned that its graduates may have their degrees revoked if they're shown to be in support of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. This contributes to a chilling effect on academic freedom in Ethiopia and beyond. It should be noted that this panel has been subject to the same chilling effect, and that in the past in Canada, a previous panel at Western University was also shut down. Beyond this, at least 25 universities in Ethiopia have donated to the Ethiopian National Defense Forces in one way or another. These contributions amount to hundreds of millions in Ethiopian birr. This information is particularly important given the Memorandum of Understanding signed between the President of the University of Toronto with the presidents of Addis Ababa and Mekelle universities. The broader purpose today is to explore the ways to alleviate this situation and take necessary action to restore peace in the region. So we'll also be thinking today about ways in which academics, the international community, and the Canadian government can help. Given that much of the fighting has been in Tigray, the devastation there has been most severe. All levels of education have been interrupted, while 4 universities were closed in the region. Just last month, Mekelle University was bombed in one of the Ethiopian government's many airstrikes. The destruction of universities is one element of the purposeful destruction of Tigray's culture. This has included the looting of ancient manuscripts, the shelling and bombing of ancient churches, mosques, monasteries, and archaeological sites, and the killing of priests who are the protectors of these cultural artifacts. Perhaps the worst confirmed destruction of Tigray's cultural heritage is that of the 7th century Al-Nagashi Mosque, one of the most important heritage sites in Tigray. Both the Aksum Sion St. Mary Church and the Dengalat St. Mary Monastery were the sites of horrific massacres by Eritrean soldiers in which hundreds of Tigrayan civilians were killed. The level of cultural destruction witnessed in Tigray since November 2020 is without precedent in Ethiopia's history. No Ethiopian government has gone to this length to destroy the cultural heritage and educational facilities of its own people. It should be noted that the purposeful destruction of a people's culture is not only a war crime that violates international law, but was also first proposed by Raphael Lemkin in 1944 as one aspect of genocide. This cultural destruction is part of a concerted campaign by the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments and Amhara militias and special forces to devastate Tigrayan society in every conceivable way. The campaign of destruction in Tigray has included countless massacres of civilians, the use of mass starvation and rape as weapons of war, ethnic cleansing of Tigrayans in territories that are disputed between Tigray and Amhara regions, and the mass arrest of Tigrayans in the tens of thousands throughout Ethiopia based on their ethnicity. Independent investigations have not been possible in Tigray because independent investigators have been blocked from entering the region by Ethiopian authorities. This includes human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, a team of experts assembled by the UN Human Rights Council, the African Union's Commission of Inquiry, and independent journalists. While the destruction of higher education institutions, cultural sites, basic infrastructure, and civilian life has been most severe and systematic in Tigray, such destruction also took place in Amhara and Afar regions after Tigray forces advanced there for a number of months, beginning in 2021. Note that while some of the speakers today are the founding fathers of Mekelle University, efforts were made to reach out to all sides. To this end, we invited Kassal Woldehana, the president of Addis Ababa University, and Berhanu Nega, the Minister of Education, but did not receive a reply. We also invited Eyob Derillo, the former curator of Ethiopian collections at the British Library, but he was unable to make it today for personal reasons. We also had Mengesha Ayene, the president of Wello University in Amhara region, who agreed to join us, but in the end, it does not look like that will be the case. So to give you an idea of how this roundtable will proceed, to begin, each of our 9 speakers will have approximately 8 minutes to present. Note that Professor Jan Nyssen was unable to join us today in person, but was kind enough to send in a video. Given that this is expected to be his only contribution, it is a bit longer. So after this, we will open up the discussion to the panelists, in which they will be able to engage with one another. We, of course, ask all our panelists to limit their responses to around 3 minutes to allow everyone a chance to respond. And we also ask the panelists to express their viewpoints in an atmosphere of respect and collegiality, and expect that the discussion will remain polite throughout. We nonetheless recognize that the issues being discussed today are highly charged and deeply personal to everyone participating. Finally, today, questions will be opened up to the audience. And note that any questions must be sent as emails and not through the chat function. We will curate them and get to as many of your questions as possible. Also note that this roundtable is being recorded and will be posted on the University of Toronto's website. Finally, I would like to extend a big thank you to Professor Michael Gerbers for all of his hard work and dedication in organizing this panel discussion. So our first speaker today is Alexei Chuyap. He is the Associate Vice President and Vice-Provost of International Student Experience at the University of Toronto. There, he is a professor of French and post-colonial studies, and his research focuses on literature, cinema, and media in Africa, currently with a project on Boko Haram. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Alexei, and thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Patrick. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this roundtable. We've all watched with distress the devastating conflict unfolding in Ethiopia over the past 2 years, and hope that the current peace agreement holds and is abided to so that the country can move forward and begin the important process of rebuilding and supporting all Ethiopians to live in peace. I hope the dialogue today contributes to that very important goal. I wanted to focus my remarks on several things today. The first is to provide some context about the memorandum of agreement process between U of T and partner international universities. The second is to touch on the history of the collaboration between University of Toronto and several universities in Ethiopia. Let me start by situating how MOUs are developed at the university. As Professor Gerbers had indicated, this would be helpful context for this discussion. Typically, the institution or a division within the university will sign an MOU with another university where there is already proven strong faculty-to-faculty collaboration as a desire to scale that up. MOUs are not typically initiated top-down at the university, but they reflect those already strong collaborations and are developed to support these. Note that many faculty members collaborate internationally without MOUs in place, but where there is a goal to scale up or a sense that an MOU will help facilitate the partnership, one can be put in place. One example of facilitating a partnership might be cases where an MOU helps with faculty and student mobility as they provide a written agreement to which individuals can point when working in a particular region. Some MOUs are signed off by divisions and others by central leadership at the university, really depending on whether faculty from multiple portfolios are involved. In the case of Ethiopia, the university currently has 2 MOUs created to support ongoing collaboration. An MOU with Mekelle University was signed in 2018. It was initiated by Professor Gebrehiwot based on the strong collaboration between him and colleagues at Mekelle. Support for the MOUs was also expressed by other departments, including the Center for Medieval Studies, History, Linguistics, and Near and Middle Eastern civilizations. For this reason, an institution-wide MOU was signed. Aspirations, Professor Gebrehiwot articulated as priorities under the MOU include, among other things, I will quote from them, encouraging cooperation over the teaching of all Ethiopic guest language and courses on Ethiopian history and other cultural aspects like literature, music, and religion. Such cooperation might entail the exchange of faculty and or the establishment of a teaching program in Ethiopia where our students might go for a semester to study. The university has an MOU with Addis Ababa University, also signed in 2018. This MOU arose from the now almost 20-year collaboration that began with the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto and expanded to include a number of clinical and other departments. This, I would like to indicate and emphasize, is a non-political initiative whose goals are to train and build capacity across the country in areas such as mental health, psychiatry and psychology, speech-language pathology, radiation oncology, dentistry, emergency medicine, family and community medicine, health science education, pharmacy, law, and health system leadership, for example. This active collaboration, called the Toronto Addis Ababa Academic Collaboration, or TAC, brings together faculty and learners from the U of T with colleagues at Addis Ababa University. Together, they support AAU in preparing the specialist professionals Ethiopia needs. Approximately 100 faculty volunteers travel to teach in Addis Ababa each year as part of TAC. By developing and strengthening AAU's graduate medical and academic programs, the program builds capacity in Ethiopia to train Ethiopian professionals with the goal of developing a robust and accessible healthcare system and improve economy and preempt food insecurity and unemployment. And the contribution to Ethiopia's health system over the past 20 years by co-creating a training program that takes place in Ethiopia has been very significant. The program has trained physicians as well as psychiatrists who have helped in the aftermath of past conflicts, including in addressing trauma and supporting refugees, and that has had a critical role to play in addressing the consequences of the current conflict. When the program began in 2002, Ethiopia had 5 psychiatrists for every 8 physicians trained. And for every 8 physicians trained, only 1 was in Ethiopia. As of 2022, over 100 Ethiopian psychiatrists have been trained with the assistance of a TAC program. There are now 113 in the country and 7 departments of psychiatry in the country. And as you know, psychiatrists trained in the country have a 95% retention rate, while physicians have overall 90%. The program is contributing in other ways as well. For instance, in emergency medicine. The first emergency medicine resident graduated in 2013, and there have been a total of 69 graduated emergency physicians to date, including 8 graduated from AAU in early 2021, with about 58 still in training. Graduates of the emergency medicine program are now the leaders of emergency medicine in Ethiopia, taking on leadership positions to contribute to emergency medicine development across the country. Amongst many achievements, graduates have been involved in the establishment of emergency medicine department at 13 public hospitals across Ethiopia. Through the University of Toronto International Office, we support the continued need for dialogue and collaboration moving forward at tables such as this one, so that all Ethiopian can continue to benefit from the collaboration I've just described today. That will be all for me. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Alexei, very much. So our next presenter today is Professor Richard Reid. He is a professor of African history at the University of Oxford. His work focuses on the history of political culture, warfare, and militarism in Africa. Professor Reid is one of the most eminent scholars of history of the Horn of Africa region. He's most notably written a firsthand account of his experience as a professor in Eritrea during the 1998 to 2000 Ethio-Eritrean War. Professor Reid.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So I've been set a very difficult task, which is to summarize modern Ethiopian history and the background to the current tragedy in 8 minutes. And to do so in as balanced a way as possible. And as some of the audience will know, history anywhere, of course, is contested. It's particularly contested in the Horn of Africa. So one person's telling of it is not necessarily another person's telling of it. I'm going to be try to be as neutral as possible, with apologies to people on the panel who will know this material very well, and of course will have lived through it. But I just have a few comments really with the student body in mind, perhaps people who are attending this event and are just beginning to explore the modern history of the region. So the immediate background to the current crisis, the TPLF, of course, was the leading member of the coalition, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, which had dominated Ethiopian politics for almost 30 years, from the early 1990s until 2018. And as part of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's reforms, the EPRDF was abolished. It was replaced by a movement called the Prosperity Party, which the TPLF declined to be a part of. At the same time, in that same period in 2018, a few months earlier, in fact, the other thing that Abiy did was he made peace with Eritrea, which had been engaged in a destructive standoff with Ethiopia since 2000, when the last peace agreement had, the nominal peace agreement had been signed. And I want to come back to Eritrea in a few moments. But I think we need to note that the peace agreement in 2018 took many people by surprise, and was unthinkable before Abiy Ahmed himself became Prime Minister of Ethiopia. It could certainly have been unthinkable while the TPLF were still at the center of Ethiopian politics. So what these events have meant, in effect, is what we might term the remarginalization of the TPLF, and in many respects Tigray itself, from mainstream Ethiopian politics, really for the first time since the 1980s. But this is also a reflection of deeper regional and ethnic tensions, and I use that term for convenience sake. Often, as many people will know, in the global north, when we talk about Africa, ethnicity is used as a kind of catch-all, a huge umbrella term, and it's often quite a lazy term. So apologies for reverting to it. But the recent events do fit into a broader pattern of conflicts in Ethiopian history. It's important to recognize that Ethiopia has long been a contested space. It's a contested concept, and various groups over a very long period of time have challenged for the center, have believed that particular groups that capture that center do not speak for Ethiopia, do not speak for all Ethiopians. We don't have time today to delve into the much deeper past, and we could go back, of course, hundreds of years here. I'll confine myself to more recent decades. And of course, in the 1970s and the 1980s, the TPLF was one of several revolutionary insurgencies challenging the unitary authoritarianism, which was encapsulated by a state known as the Derg. And this was the Marxist period in Ethiopian history. The Derg believed in a unitary approach to Ethiopian politics. And what this often meant was the brutal suppression of various groups that dissented from that vision. The TPLF, from that point of view, was part of a revolutionary wave, really, throughout that period, really beginning in the 1960s and running through to the 1990s across Eastern, Central, Southern Africa, of movements that fundamentally challenged what they regarded as old post-colonial orders that had become autocratic and weren't fully representative of the nation's citizens. But the Derg itself, brutal though it was in fact the outcome of a similar kind of violent radicalism. It was a response to the authoritarianism of the imperial regime, which had been forged in the late 19th century, as many in the audience will know, by Emperor Menelik, further consolidated by Haile Selassie through much of the 20th century. And that particular form of the state was seen to enshrine Amhara domination at the expense of many other groups and regions. Under Haile Selassie, it's worth noting, there's been a certain amount of revisionism around that particular emperor. But it's worth remembering that there were a number of uprisings and insurgencies, especially in the 1960s, which were very brutally suppressed. And of course, even earlier, again, in Tigray itself, in 1943, the original Wayani, which was one of the first expressions of armed resistance against Haile Selassie in the north. Turning to the Eritrean factor in all this, one of the insurgencies in this period, in the 1960s, 1970s, was in Eritrea, the province which had formerly been an Italian colony, was annexed by Haile Selassie's Ethiopia in the early, federated in the early 1950s and annexed in the early 1960s. Eritrean nationalists believed that they had the right to self-determination. Their independence war was launched in 1961. This was a remarkably successful movement. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the EPLF, became dominant in the 1970s and 1980s. Compressing that history somewhat for the sake of time, they, of course, eventually won Eritrean independence in 1991. Along the way, two things happened, which I think feed into the situation that we are confronted with today. The first was that the EPLF developed a highly authoritarian internal system, which has been imposed on Eritrea itself for the last 30 years, which has also given rise to an extraordinarily aggressive foreign policy and a belief that Eritrea has the right to interfere in pretty much everybody's wars in the whole region, but particularly those in Ethiopia. And the second thing that happened was an inevitable relationship with the TPLF. And despite episodic cooperation with the TPLF, the EPLF, the Eritreans, had generally a very difficult relationship with the Tigrayan movement. And this was related to various issues, largely around, for example, outdated ideology, to us now quite outdated, borders, and the nature of nationalism itself. What was Tigray? What was Eritrea? It meant that in the 1990s, with the TPLF in power in Ethiopia and the EPLF in Eritrea, the 1998 to 2000 war was not inevitable. As I tell my own students, nothing, of course, in history is inevitable, but it was very, very likely. It was fought to a stalemate, but Eritrea definitely came out worse. And to try to summarize this in a moment or two, Isaias in Asmara, the EPLF have never really forgiven the TPLF for the events of that war. They had a very haughty, supercilious attitude toward the TPLF. They believed they could dominate them, and yet they came out worse in this particular conflict. The Eritrean state has committed itself to the destruction of the TPLF ever since, and Abiy Ahmed's reforms in 2018 allowed Isaias Afwerki, the Eritrean president, the opportunity to do so. Couple of final things. It's worth noting that the atrocities that we've witnessed in the last couple of years in Tigray are sadly not unprecedented. And again, it's just to historically contextualize this, throughout Ethiopia's long 20th century, we in fact see that kind of violence as the hallmark of modern conflict in the region, and in many ways can be traced back several centuries. Now, often violence in this region has been accompanied by the otherization of particular communities, underpinned by ideological conviction or religious belief. So it's what we've seen in the last couple of years is shocking, but a trawl through the deeper past would suggest that we need to use history as a guide in terms of how we can properly get to grips with the attacks on cultural artifacts and on non-combatant communities. I just want to finish very quickly with something that Patrick referred to in his introduction, and that is my own time at the University of Asmara in Eritrea over quite a few years. And I witnessed it firsthand what happens when universities become caught up in both political violence and war itself. And I speak as a historian. Lots of other colleagues in the university were similarly affected. Historical research itself was essentially shut down. And initially this was quite quietly done. Those of us who worked in the history department there were more or less told to be quiet, just do our teaching, but don't teach anything controversial and so forth. And then it became rather more sinister. Students would be disappeared and rounded up, put in the army and so on. Now, in large part, this was because of the overwhelming desire on the part of the Eritrean government to control the historical narrative, going all the way back to their own armed struggle. But also the minds of people who are not seen as individuals, but a kind of trained, militarized collective who must give everything to the national cause. In the end, the university was shut down and replaced with a series of colleges which are dispersed, prison-like across the country. And a generation of young, talented Eritreans has either been grafted into a brutal and brutalizing army or pay huge amounts of money to escape to Europe and will often die in the attempt. All of which leads me to my final point, which is a fairly obvious one, but worth reiterating, that violence distorts our ability to think rationally and clearly when in the midst of it, and prompts political actors to do catastrophic things which are profoundly inimical, in fact, to their long-term, the nation's long-term interests. Higher education clearly has a central role to play in the development of independent and critical thought. But the key seems to be that that does indeed lead to criticism. Eritrea, where the government has effectively destroyed the sector, is an example of how not to go about rebuilding higher education in the post-war Horn of Africa. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Professor Reid, for setting the stage in terms of the historical context. I think that's really important for all of our viewers, especially for those that are less familiar with the history of Ethiopia and Eritrea. So our next speaker today is Kindeya Gebrehiwot. He's a senior cabinet member of the government of Tigray and a representative of Tigray's External Affairs Office. He's also the former president of Mekelle University from 2013 until 2020. And he is, in fact, the president with whom Provost Reid signed a memorandum of understanding in 2018. He's also currently a professor at Mekelle University at the College of Dryland Agriculture and Natural Resources. Kindeya?
First of all, I would like to thank the University of Toronto and the Department of Historical and Cultural Studies for inviting me to give a brief talk today. As you can see, we're under a complete siege, and perhaps if there will be some interruptions, please bear with me. I will speak on what's happening especially on the higher education in Tigray, who is mainly focusing on Mekelle. So we'll briefly talk about what has been achieved. Most of you would know that there has been, next slide please, there has been very important massive progress and reforms in higher education in Tigray and also in Ethiopia. And the gross enrollment ratio have been increasing from below to 1% 2 decades ago to about 12% in 2020. And there has been also a lot of progress in terms of research outputs, both in country and also the global share. And even before 3 years, there was an initiative on higher education differentiation based on mission and focus areas to boost excellence in teaching and research on focused and priority areas in Ethiopia. So there was very good improvement. And in Tigray, we have 4 universities. Mekelle University has been one of the top 3 universities in the country and well rated also in Africa. Aksum, Adigrad, and Raya universities were also performing very well. So if you consider the situation in Mekelle, we have more than 100,000 alumni. This is it's a very young university, but you can imagine the contribution to the country in general. But since we started the war in 2020, the impact on higher education in Tigray was very devastating. So the progress we've been talking have been already dashed, and higher education in Tigray has almost collapsed. This will apply both to public and private. Actually, in the first since November 2020 to June 2021, the university tried to catch up, but after June 2021, it almost collapsed. So the university is under a complete siege. When we say siege, there is no communication, power, transport, commerce, bank, all what people think or people take for granted. So in Tigray, there's a complete shutdown of everything. So the universities are not exceptions. In terms of financial, there was no budget at all because the universities are federal universities, so there was no budget since 2021. All the bank accounts are blocked, international projects are frozen, all the administration system has been dismantled. So the staff altogether from the 4 universities, we have about 25,000 staff who are left with no salary since 2021. So you can imagine how that would impact the staff in all the 4 universities. Today, the staff have been victims of weaponized starvation, rapes, famine, massacre, atrocities. Even some of staffs have died due to lack of medicine and even the air attacks. Actually, some Aksum University staff have died during the Aksum massacre in November 2020. The staff went abroad for scholarship, like some of the staff will be talking today, could not come back to Tigray because all due to the blockade. There was no scholarship for the last 2 years. For the MOU that Alexei was mentioning was supposed to give scholarships to our staff and staff student exchange with the universities, including the University of Toronto. That has not happened. In terms of students, altogether from the 4 years, we had more than 90,000 students. But since 2021 June, the students had to be sent home, dispersed, and actually the Tigrayans elsewhere in the country have been facing challenges because they couldn't communicate to their families or get support. So as I said earlier, all international collaboration are frozen. So there is no meaningful international research going on except very few. In terms of infrastructure, the labs, the classrooms, laboratories, libraries, offices, dormitories, and all the expensive equipments were looted or damaged deliberately by the Ethiopian and the Eritrean army, and still what's going on. Campus of the universities were used as a military base by both the Ethiopian and the Eritrean armies. So Ethiopian universities, as was mentioned in the introduction, have even threatened Tigrayans to revoke their degrees, especially the Addis Ababa University. And actually, some of the campus were even attacked by drones and also artillery, and some students even have sustained wounds and some even have died. So the current status, we have few faculty who have managed to publish works that were continuing their collaboration with international partners, but very limited. Some postgraduate students and medicine students have managed to complete their studies that were near completing. Some even got award, like laureate Professor Matuko Haile, who became the laureate of recipient of the 2021 World Agriculture Prize. Overall, since June 2021, there was no student intake and teaching learning process is completely stopped. Tigrayan University staff elsewhere have been imprisoned or killed because of their ethnicity, and I think especially those in the Amhara University. But still there is resilience, still staff with no salary, but they are trying to support the society in any capacity they can, like some of the medical doctors are still working in the hospitals and professors are still advising community-based initiatives that could help the society. So the future, we have recently a peace agreement signed by both the federal and regional government of Tigray. So we expect the healing process should start. So universities are still eager to start work again and contribute their shared societal development in global science. Infrastructural and technical damage need maintenance, repair, and replacement of the universities to become fully functional. As an example, like Adigras University was completely looted by the Eritrean forces. The damage is close to 43 billion Ethiopian birr, which is around 1 billion. And we have traumatized staff that would need psychological and motivational programs to help them overcome what they faced and become productive. We also need joint postgraduate programs and staff student exchange initiatives that would fill the gap that we had in the last 2 years. Sociology and psychological issues, orthopedic, prosthetics, forensic, investigative science. Anyway, you'd imagine any institution that would come post-war. And so we expect the partnerships that we have started that would continue when we have normalization. So our universities will build with the idea that they would provide our society with the support it needs if the international partnership continues. We need partnership, rebuilding our systems, infrastructure, capacity to meet those standards. So we hope the University of Toronto would play a constructive role, especially if we have society, the signed memorandum of understanding. But finally, I would like to say Tigray welcomes you all. And thank you very much. If my connection is interrupted, my colleagues, Guitoom or Habos or Wolbert or Michael would respond to the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kindeya. So our next speaker today is Mitiku Haile. He's a professor of...
Sorry, Patrick.
Yeah, is he not
Patrick,
available? Yeah.
Mituku has not come, but when he comes, I will let you know. So you can continue with the other project.
Okay, perfect. So given that, our next speaker is Professor Jan Nyssen. So as I said before, Jan has been kind enough to send in a video because he wasn't able to join us in person today. But just to give you a bit of his background, Professor Nyssen is an Emeritus professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Ghent. So amid this war, his research on Ethiopia has included contributing to documenting the massacres in Tigray, estimating the death toll as a result of man-made famine, the lack of access to health services following the purposeful destruction of Tigray's health system, and the blocking of medication and other essential goods in Tigray. He's also done a lot of research on historical maps in Tigray with specific relevance to the disputed territories between Amhara and Tigray regions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Professor Nyssen's video presentation.
Good day to all of you. My name is Jan Nyssen, and I'm going to talk about the involvement of Ethiopian universities in the Tigray War. I'm happy to build upon contributions by my colleagues Gebrehiwot, Emnet, Gebrehiwot, and Amare, who spent a lot of time in screening Facebook messages on Ethiopian universities' Facebook pages. I have myself a lot of expertise in Ethiopia. Since 1994, I'm working with Ethiopian universities. You see the overview here. The size of the dots on the map represents a bit the intensity of the cooperation that we were having. As a measuring unit, I used the number of PhD that we secured in each of these projects. But as you can see, I know a bit about the Ethiopian university landscape. When the war on Tigray started, we launched a scientists' call for ceasefire, with involving a lot of scientists with expertise and experience in Ethiopia. That was just 1 week after the war started. And after that, we started reporting the information that we collected. We documented the humanitarian situation. We mapped and we prepared the Tigray Atlas of the humanitarian situation. And for instance, we were very soon to report the Mahabharadego massacre. You may have seen the Mahabharadego massacre on RTTV. And before the videos even came out, we knew it. So I mean, we have a lot of information from the ground. Now, immediately when we launched this initiative, I got confronted with a deliberate hate campaign. And well, you must know that at the global level, there is a well-oiled hate campaign that is set up by the Ethiopian ministries against anybody who shows concern about human rights related to Ethiopia or to Tigray in particular. At top level, and now I'm talking about my own case, just taking that one, but there are so many others, obvious. Embassies and Ministry of Foreign Affairs launching hate campaigns, of course, and this is just one example, but in my case, there must have been a dozen like such things. When we go to the grassroots level, the same thing is expressed in a more popular way, let me say. I have become then the false eye professor and the racist. I've been fighting against racism since my age of 15, I think, but still now people call me racist. Here you have another one, the one-eyed frog called Nyssen. So this is grassroots translation of what the Ethiopian ministries are doing. When we come to universities, I was happy to receive, unhappy to receive such type of messages from a professor of Bahardar University calling me the gay. What does he know about my sexual orientation? And of course, at the bottom you will see, I hate your skewed eye, I hate your old smelly shoes, etc. University professor at Bahardar University. Let that sink in. I have never seen any Tigrayan professor, any Tigrayan intellectual writing this type of hate messages. This comes really clearly from one camp. And of course, just taking my own example, what is there is very minor in contrast to what Tigrayan colleagues all over are getting from hate speech over them. Here you see another example from a certain professor, Seyum Teshome, Ambo University. Look at the photo. This man should be shot in the head, just like they did to Ambassador Seyum Mesfin and the likes. This comes from a university professor. So, when we come to Ethiopian universities, there are major infringements against academic freedom and they cover up human rights abuses. I have given these examples of Seyum Teshome at Ambo University. We have Mukhtarovic in Jijiga. We have Taya and Dagnacho in Addis Ababa University. In universities went to the extent to revoke academic degrees based on disagreement on positions, statements that people made or could make. Addis Ababa University wanted to revoke academic degrees from anybody they perceived as supporting TPLF. Gondar University revoked the honorary doctorate of Eleni Gebrehiwot because she spoke out about the Tigray war. You should be informed that as soon as we took the initiative, when we come to these universities in Amhara region, Gondar, Bahardar, Wollo University, they were claiming this is the war that we have been waiting for since 30 years. Don't make any obstacle. This is the talk that comes out of those Ethiopian universities. That's what I would call harassment of international collaborators. These universities, particularly the universities in Amhara region, they are clearly supporting modification of internal borders, illegal modification of internal borders. Here you have a photo of the presidents of all universities in Amhara region who traveled to Humera to support the conquest of Western Tigray by the Amhara region. A bit like Ontario University professors would move to the border of Quebec and claim that we need to conquer some part of Quebec to Ontario. These professors, these university rectors never inquired about all the human rights abuses that took place in those areas. It went to the extent that Gondar University has been disposing the evidence of massacres that happened in Western Tigray. You can see that on the BBC News website. Sorry to say, I am not putting references on each of these documents that I'm showing you, but if you go to our database about the Ethiopian public universities during the Tigray war, all these facts are listed down in tables, and we have put all the references, all the hyperlinks, so everything that I'm telling you, you can check it through hyperlinks. Mostly it comes from Facebook pages. these universities very often, 2-3 weeks later, they say, oh, this is meant for internal communication. This should not reach the outside world. And they started deleting their own web pages. Fortunately, with our colleagues, we managed to make a lot of archiving, and many of these Facebook hate messages has been saved. And you can all cross-check it later on. So, based on Tigrayan ethnicity, very commonly universities have been involved in human rights abuses. They have been actively involved. Here is an example of Gebrehiwot University in Amhara region, and one of their students, Saare, he was stoned to death by other students, by a mob of other students. You wouldn't, you know, in Belgium, if one student dies because they have been drinking together and it was excessive, students will be fired from university. But here students have been stoned to death. A student has been stoned to death and the university doesn't even react on it. So I am saying this is complicity. If you don't react to one of your students being stoned to death, you are complicit to that murder. That's the case of Gebrehiwot. Wollo University, very similar case. Here 2 professors have been killed by a mob of Fano-fascist militants. Some of the Wollo University staff participated in that mob and in the killing. We have never seen any condemnation from the side of Wollo University. Again, Baardar University never condemned the murder of Professor Mearek, who was again killed by Fano-fascist militants. And Professor Mearek was born in Tigray. He was grown up in Baardar. He has been working in Baardar for decades. He was contributing a lot to the status of that university. They didn't even issue a condolence message after he was murdered, and their own university-related Facebook pages were inciting to hate. This message was posted a couple of days before Professor Mearek was murdered. Sometimes the involvement is passive, let me call it passive. We can still discuss, is this passive or active? Lectures are put to concentration camps, and personally I know examples from Addis Ababa, from Arba Minch, from Baardar, from Debre Tabor, from Jimma, and mostly the university management is sending some of their staff to guide the military people to the house of the Tigrayans who have been put into these concentration camps. So somehow they are complicit, because at least they are guiding, they are showing the house of these people. In many cases, even after the Tigrayan staff were taken to prison or taken to concentration camps, some guys within the university, they stole their car and they stole their household items without any reaction from the university. I must say that in this whole list of universities that are abusing about their staff of Tigrayan ethnicity, our reporting is a bit highlighting one university, that is Haramaya University, which is considered as a relative safe place. And even to the extent that the university management, when Tigrayan staff are captured by police, university management goes to the police station to take them out and to prevent them to end up in a concentration camp. Generally, such universities are managed by Oromo professors. Then there is also Ethiopian universities supporting the warfare, not only by talk but even materially. In cash, overtly, about all universities have sent money to the Ethiopian armed forces. Here you see the example of Professor Tasso Waldahana of Addis Ababa University, president of the university, who is handing over a check of 60 million birr to the Ethiopian army. In kind also, they have contributed, these universities contributed a lot to the Ethiopian army. Again, here you see the same Professor Tasso of Addis Ababa University giving a university car to the army. You wouldn't be surprised that in the next project from an international donor, they will insist, please give us a car in this project. There are also a lot of covered support that is not reported publicly, but sending their cars, even without donating, but sending their cars, driving military people up and down. Typically something that is done. Here we have as a rare example, University of Gondar has been boasting about such logistical support to the Ethiopian army on their way of making war against Tigray. Sports academies, universities and their sports academies, especially in Amhara region, did also organize military training for their staff in order to send them to the war. You see here an example in Bahar Dar University. So this is, of course, our database holds a lot of examples, but this is a short overview. The Ministry of Science and Higher Education has been fully complicit in that. First thing, and maybe the main thing of all, is that the bank accounts of the Tigray universities has been closed. Their budget was not released. Staff of Mekelle University who continue to work, who continue to publish papers, their staff salaries are not paid since June. These genocide advocates that I showed you in Ethiopian universities, ministry is totally silent. When the academic year is finished, the Tigrayan students, they are sent out to the street from Addis Ababa University, from Jimma University, and they face the hostility of all the paramilitary groups in their environment. Universities are not protecting them. The ministry is not calling out. When Mekelle University or Adigrat University, for that matter, are hit by airstrikes, by drone strikes, would you mind? But ministry is not talking about it. And then on September, the ministry is there. We are giving 211 million there to the army. That's the only thing that they are boasting about when it comes to the war on Tigray. Again, I told you all this in this database that you can consult on Zenodo. Now, with our database that we established, being very rigorous, we have only focused on the involvement of the authorities themselves. We have had university staff that were killed being soldiers, or campuses that were damaged by shelling from armed forces. This is not reported in our database. We focus on the responsibility of the academic authorities. And of course, very difficult to have communication, and the database is very incomplete. But as you can see from the presentation, the human rights abuses, they are widespread at Ethiopian universities. Among all the Ethiopian universities, when we focus on the universities on Tigray, our tables are giving blank data. We don't come across any infringements against human rights or academic freedom by the universities in Tigray. Nobody has been killed because of his ethnicity. Nobody has been sanctioned for expressing his own opinions in the universities in Tigray. They are exceptional, except maybe Haramaya and a few other universities in the southern part of Ethiopia. Now, we could say, but these university administration, this is the general context, and they are forced to follow the general trend. But no, an individual, be it a university rector, they have their own responsibility. They could leave their position. They could resign. I don't agree with all this, what is happening in this university. I resign. And As an example, we have even had an Ethiopian minister, Minister Filsan, who left her position because she disagreed what the government was doing. So why a university president couldn't do the same? So if they didn't resign, it means they agree with what has happened. And then when it comes to international university cooperation, all these universities sending their money to the Ethiopian army. So what? That means they send their money to the Ethiopian army, and then they are begging us from projects, please contribute to, please let's make, and they come with very big smiles, that's obvious. Please let us make a project together and with a lot of blah, blah, but what they need is the money. So these universities have the money, excess money, to give it to the army, and then they come to international donors, please give me money. I would wonder who is the politician who could explain that to the taxpayer. You know, these Ethiopian universities, they have a lack of money. They send so much money to the army. So now we need to make projects to give them new money. Please, guys, be serious. And with all that, I'm sorry, of course, you felt that I'm becoming nervous in this presentation. I see all these colleagues, and this is just a very small sample. I see all these colleagues who have been killed in this on the premises of the universities themselves. I want to thank you for your attention, and don't hesitate to visit our documentation that we have published at various places. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Nyssen. And we're happy to see that you've been able to join us in person now for the remainder of the event and the roundtable discussion. So unless Professor Mitiku is ready, then we'll move on to our next speaker, Gautam Tegeng Admasu. Established and led the International Office of Mekelle University from 2014 until 2021. He's an employee of Mekelle University who is currently a lecturer, an international officer, and a program coordinator at Thomas More University of Applied Sciences in Belgium. Gautam?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's fine.
Wonderful. I will be sharing my slides in a while and be starting. Yeah, I hope it's visible now.
Yep, we can see it.
Wonderful. Thank you. I will basically focus on giving a couple of backgrounds on our university, Mekelle University's couple of facts alongside the partnerships we had with Canadian universities and beyond. I wouldn't leave this session without mentioning a couple of points about what was happening before November 4, before the breaking of the war, and then a little bit after that. And honestly, I have been very actively engaged in activities at national level in Ethiopia, closely working with the Ministry of Higher Education as well. So I would also be pointing out a couple of things that I observed as far as the Ethiopian higher education has responded towards the situation. Of course, most of the points I'm putting will be overlapping with some of the presenters, but I hope it will be to make things clear to the participants of this webinar. I also like to thank the University of Toronto for organizing this kind of event, which actually is a huge opportunity for us who struggle to find platforms for really telling our story. I tell stories about Mekelle University, which will pretty much be similar to what has happened in universities in Tigray. The 4 universities including Aksum, Adigrat, and Raya University, which in addition to Samara University are called the Northern Cluster Universities as per the Ethiopian classification. We started under a tree as a very small university. For those who are not informed about our university, to be interesting to know the journey, how far it went and how remarkable the achievements were before everything happened. So 3 decades ago, our university started under a tree with meager facilities, with very few teachers, less than 10 teachers and less than 200 students. In 30 years' time, the university evolved into a university of 33,000 enrollment size with 10,000 employees, out of which 2,300 are academia and a significant staff working under the Ida Referral Hospital, which is actually administered by the College of Health Sciences. We also had comprehensive faculties under 7 colleges and 11 institutes, which provided 365 programs, out of which 65% of the programs were postgraduate programs, as the direction towards the future was actually building on postgraduate programs and homegrown PhD programs. We also had 6 active campuses and quite more outreach facilities out of the Mekelle. And as per the standards for the nation, which were growing by the time, our female to male student ratio was way better at a good score nationally. We prioritized collaborations with Africa, really brought up a lot of activities into our university. We believed in internationalization as at home as a way to really bring quality. And now we have been one of the best destinations of international actors in the region. We have been working with more than 125 universities across the globe, in taking us to 55 countries, including Canada. And to briefly mention, we have been also very much active in hosting national and international sessions and conferences and seminars, out of which, one good example would be the 20th International Conference of Ethiopian Studies, which brought hundreds of scholars studying Ethiopian, working in Ethiopian studies to Mekelle, and actually have a lot of good collaboration and discussion. Coming to what we had with Canada, a couple of years ago, we had the delegation visiting us from the Global Affairs Canada funded project, the STEM project, which was actually about strengthening education for mining in Ethiopia. And that has been including Addis Ababa University, ASTU, Mekelle University, and Aksum. Similarly, we had the signing of our MOU with the University of Toronto back in 2018, an MOU with the University of Saskatchewan in 2019 as well, which was basically an institutional collaboration, but with specific connections with the College of Health Sciences. Before November 4, in addition to our activities, there has been the COVID pandemic, desert locust swarm for about 7-8 months, which we were fighting. Our campuses, our university facilities were actually geared towards fighting the pandemic, and students were not in campus because the university was shut down as per the guidelines from the national government. And of course, we only continued with undergraduate, postgraduate programs and a couple of our activities online. And pretty much everything was geared towards fighting the pandemic and of course the swarm. That was a couple of months before the war broke out. The war broke out on November 4, and then everything changed. Universities in Tigray, as a result of the war, has been targeted they have been looting, destroyed. If I have to speak about the university that I have been in when this all broke out, our campus of veterinary medicine has been totally destroyed. And a lot has happened when it comes to service blockade and hospital related problems that we faced as a community. As I speak about Mekelle University, it's pretty much about everything that happened to the people of Tigray. It's air bombardments. As we had about 4,000 students actively studying at that time. So just to mention, a couple of months before the war broke out, only graduating class students were readmitted because we said at minimal size they can actually study and graduate with safety. And that was why we had 3,500 to 4,000 students on campus when the war broke out. Relocating them was a very difficult task, but it was accomplished in collaboration with the UN and everybody else. quite at times. The Ethiopian government actually breaking its promises of receiving the students on the Afar end. There has been a lot of back and forth problems, sending out communication through rare possibilities. It was a difficult time that we faced. The war has actually brought everything on hold in Tigray, except that it normalized air bombing, looting, killing, indiscriminate killings, displacement of people, and of course, sexual violence. I witnessed 78,000 internally displaced people in schools in Mekelle at the very beginning, the first 2 months of the war. That has grown to hundreds of thousands afterwards. I remember this as it's remarkable that we're discussing on November 22, because exactly 2 years ago, this was what the Ethiopian military posted and actually practiced. They said they were going to shell the city of Mekelle unless the people actually leave the city. And it happened. Dozens died and close to 100 were injured in these shellings of the town. Couple of pictures from the veterinary college laboratory, which we actually valued up to 610 million Ethiopian birr, which was mainly laboratory infrastructure and equipments that were looted, deliberately destroyed. Airstrike shootings and drone attacks killed staff and students in our premises. 3 security guards were shot and killed. Students have been injured, and we have had incidents where bombings took place within the institution. One of the main challenges have been connectivity issues in our system. That has stopped all PG programs, international projects. Communication is impossible. Where our website is down, all universities in Tigray do not have communication with the outside world. There is no collaboration, there is no scientific publication, and then of course there is no possibility of mobility exchange, which we were used to do under many collaboration activities. The drone attacks on September 13th being the recent ones where the university has openly denounced them and really indicated that these are war crimes and no military target is within the premises of the university. Of course, a lot has been said about how the Ethiopian universities have reacted towards this. Our best wish was that they could have really worked towards a common platform of dialogue, pushing for peace to come, pushing for the war to stop from the very beginning. This has not been the case for Ethiopian universities, as it was mentioned. I really wished Professor Mangasha came today. That was my big hope, because one of the most bizarre stories when it comes to Tigrayans being discriminated and hunted is what happened in Wollo University. Professor Yan has mentioned the killing of the 2 lecturers at Wollo University, lecturer Haile Habanom and Brahanu Gide. But in addition to that, the president himself, who is actually the member of the Prosperity Party, an electee of that, has been openly telling a lot of hate speech, and he is on record saying any distractions happening to Wollo University, it has been done in collaboration with students, Tigrayan students within the university. That actually created a lot of targeting, and students. At this point, Wollo University is one of the universities where there is no Tigrayan studying, and this has been very tough to swallow. His staff has been really armed and struggling on the side of the ANDF. They have been training to join the military. This has been the case in most of the universities in Ethiopia, and you would hopefully assume a scholarly community, a scientific community would act otherwise and really hope to build an image. Integrity is under question in Ethiopian universities mainly, and I have seen that on Professor Yan's presentation. The targeting that he's facing is actually the targeting that many have been facing for the last 2 years, and it's jointly coordinated by the government. The Sustainable Development Goals, this is how I would like to point at my conclusion, are all not points of discussion in Tigray. That's how far the damage has been. The universities were the window of collaboration and really solving the problems alongside the communities, but this war has disabled everything, all sectors, the universities, and the discussion of leaving no one behind is actually pretty much a joke in the case of Tigray. Coming to what should be done, I believe Canadians have the right to know on what's happening. And I don't think the Canadian embassy has been helpful in that line, and not many media coverage is taking place. So I would call upon Canadians participating in our webinar today to be fully aware about what's happening in Tigray, get closer to the Tigray community and learn about the facts, because we struggle to tell our truths as well as defend the defamation and the blackmailing by the Ethiopian government. It's a very difficult task for us, but it's easy for many to actually push towards reconnection, resumption of services in Tigray, calling for humanitarian aid to go to Tigray, and of course, investigating the atrocities on the ground. The rest is actually something that would come afterwards. I would like to end my presentation by showing this very impressive tweet from scientist Tim. He said, when a war is fought in the dark, you have to fear the worst, and you shouldn't blindly believe the one who switched off the lights. And of course, the Ethiopian government, alongside its allies, is who switched off the lights on Tigray. And we should not be taking everything that the government says. We should question. I would say act and save Tigray. Thank you very much for your time.